my role for the last several years has been academic support advisor. So I support students in their learning, embedded in the programs mostly, also individually. And as a faculty, I see a large number of students with learning disability, and particular dyslexia. And I'm going to talk about that a bit, and also my own experiences. I've called it, I only had a short time to throw some slides together. I had a very busy week last week. I called it Fish Stories. I think this will become apparent of what that means later on, so I'll just leave it as a little air of history to get our Monday even better. And that's why the is there, so you could think about that if you ever look at the next one. I guess to start with, the fact is that I'm also dyslexic. I was assessed as an adult in my 40s, but I've probably always known it. I was told in high school, when you go to in Australia, originally in the 70s, when you go to the career advisor, they're supposed to tell you what to do. They said, what do you want to do? I said, well, I quite like to go to university. And they actually laughed and said, well, why don't you leave now and get a nice job in Woolworths or something like that. So that annoyed me so much, I wagged school and went to the university. Actually, I was about 16 or 17. And I said, I've been told I can't come here. So they organised an interview for me. And on the basis of that, I got into university. And I still don't know how that happened, several postgraduate degrees later. So, I mean, that was my experience. And I think that was the experience. I'm also dysnumeric, was a key part of that. And the next one is dyspraxic a little bit and very disrespectful, which comes out. I was also assessed as being ADHD. I think the disadvantage for me is that I'm married to a psychiatrist. And as my teenage children said, between an educator and a psychiatrist, we can't get away with anything. So, and that's certainly a key point. My son is also dyslexic, so it's passed on. And I think for me, from that perspective, being assessed as an adult, I had a lot to relate to students, particularly mature students. And I was finding that we were getting students from college and from industry who were also told to leave when they were 15 because of the disruption, they were misbehaving. And because of that age group, that wasn't really assessed, there wasn't much known about it. It was an assumption. Dyslexia is spelling poorly is dyslexia, and there was more to it than that, obviously. And so, in other words, I think there's a non-verbal processing disorder for me. I don't really know left from right. I used to have the primary school teacher in the 60s who would inscribe forcefully an L and an R on my hands and on my shoes and all sorts of things. I can still get lost in the building I've worked in for the last 10 years. And for me, I mean, the assessment itself, when we were at Craig House, I once spent a week, we got these tunnels there, I found food left over from the 1800s, still quite edible. And nature coffee sustaining you isn't something you want to do, but it does help you with your ADHD. What's the next one? So for me, for me as a person with dyslexia, it doesn't actually define me, but in a way it does, because it actually helps me relate to students a lot easier. Even before I was assessed, I would be talking to students who were having all sorts of study problems, and they'd say I'd be able to explain it, I'd be able to talk to them and turn them around, because without being assessed beforehand, I still was on a level where I understood where they were coming from. And I was saying, well, you're looking at it the wrong way. You're looking at it the way that everyone else wants to look at it, but you're doing it differently. Try it from this way. And so I was able to do that. And in terms of teaching, I think it really does. The way I present things visually, when I normally do my teaching, and with lots of sort of comics and cartoony sort of things, visual images that represent what I'm talking about, really does help in that process. The ADHD part of it is I find it difficult staying still. This is me being very still, but so students find that entertaining as well, because in the old days with the cords, I used to get them wrapped around my legs and all sorts of things would happen. So it's passed on to my son. It's interesting, I find his experience in school is really hard. And we had to push pretty much. We found resistance to getting an assessment, which I found interesting. And then talking to other students, I mean, his high school now is broadly supportive, but he still has the same exams and assessments as everyone else. And with maybe they said, well, you can have extra time. And the time doesn't help him really. It's not extra time, he needs extra. We keep going back and asking, could you make sure that he can't write down what he's to do for a homework task. By the time he gets home, he gets really stressed because he's forgotten it, and he thinks the teachers will think he's stupid. And you get this it's painful, really painful to see him like that. And it shouldn't be happening. And even though I think the teachers, there's so many kids, so many varieties of background, it's easy for them to forget. And I do understand that. And my anecdotal experience also is with students now in the faculty who've come through high school. They're saying, I'm going for dyslexia assessment. I didn't know, I was assessed in school, but they weren't formally assessed. They were given an in-house assessment, and there's probably lots of reasons behind that. Probably money would be part of it. If you're formally assessed, you might have to spend more money and time on it. So they were thought that they just had this, they got a bit extra time, or it didn't really help them, and then suddenly they get a formal assessment here at university, and it really is a cathartic experience, which is what I found. So directly from school, there's that anecdotal experience. They're given a full assessment from the psychologist and through Monica and everything else, and then I find it really depends, they get this cathartic experience and they feel that they're sort of almost justified, almost like they feel strengthened by it. And they feel like, it's not just me. And that's quite a powerful thing as well. So for the older students, the mature students, we have a lot of, it really depends on the previous educational experience, how well supported they were, how well they were supported at home. And they often felt compelled to leave because of all these things going on around them. And then they come back. And one of the things they're told, and which I also experienced, is you're not working hard enough. You're just not trying, but then what they would say is, I have to work harder than most people in the class just to do the same work. So maybe that extra time helps, but this is the experience they have. They're also being told that they're lazy, or they've got behaviour issues, and that might be an element of truth in that. But for them, the extra time doesn't always help, so just giving an extra bit of time, it does help to a certain extent, but it's not the only answer. And there's so many varieties, so many different sort of dyslexia. It's just this broad thing to me that it can impact on people in different ways. And it doesn't always help, but it is quite helpful. So what else? And for them, it's a cathartic experience. So, one student said to me, I've been classified as having a learning disability, but I don't feel disabled. I just wish you guys would teach and assess me in the way that I learn. And I think that's the issue, is having varieties of assessments and learning that will help them. I came in late and I heard Mark talking about the oral examinations, and that was a classic example for me. In Australian education, we had lots of opportunities to present in university and high school, and there were marked assessments. And so for me, that actually caused an issue for assessors, because in an oral exam, I could get 90-something% or more, and the same written exam, I get 20%. Didn't matter how much I prepared for it, because I just didn't do very well for written exams. And I get that experience from our students sometimes, that if they could just talk about it, if they could just say what they know, if they were asked about it, then they could actually get it out, but they can't get it out in writing. And the extra time doesn't always help with that. So I think it's, their disadvantages, their unique learning styles and strengths are misunderstood. And that's not anyone's fault, because it's really hard to understand all the different learning styles, and it's really hard to have a large group of students and to work equally for all of them. But I would say that the students I work with individually, and I would say as a faculty as well, I think Monica would agree that given the national percentage or average of adults with dyslexia, we probably have quite a much higher proportion than it. For historical reasons or whatever else, students used to probably still see computing and engineering and design, the artistic side would be represented, but also maybe I can avoid doing writing, which isn't true. That might have been true many, many years ago. Maybe I could just get away with it, and that isn't the case. There's written assessments, there's written exams, and so on. But I have seen students going well, starting poorly, but with that extra, that input, support that we give as a faculty, and also the support that I give, if you just sit and talk through processes and approaches to learning, they do continue from there and do very well. And they do, with that support, they do very well. And I've seen it happen, and it's a great thing to see. And even for me, you can work with a very bright student, a very good student, and you forget, because I see hundreds of students, individually and in groups and otherwise, and you think, oh, come on, you can do, what are you doing? You haven't spelt this right, or, why have you put that word there, and why have you done it this way? Well, it's obviously been told to do it this way. And then you suddenly, oh, hang on. It's easy to forget that, even for me. So I think we have to remember that it's not just going to go away, it's not going to change, it just needs lots of support and so on. So, what else? Here's an image that I like for both of these. The fish one comes in underneath. I like the first one. You can see they've talked about the teacher role, giving very individualised, meeting their individual requirements and ways of learning, and then they're going to assess it with a standardised test that everyone has to do. But this one comes back to the fish one for me, and I think, I can't remember who it was, I think it was supposed to be Albert Einstein or someone like that, who said that, you can't assess equally when everyone, including a fish, is assessed by their ability to climb a tree. So if we're going to have standardised assessments, then we are disadvantaging students who aren't standard in the way that we look at it. So we have a duty, I think, that we have to, if we're going to include these students, we have to be inclusive. So if you can't judge a fish by their ability to climb a tree, because they can't, or they might be with a lot of help, but I think we have to think of, are we including all students? Are we being inclusive? And we're not talking about an insignificant percentage, particularly as a faculty. How many do you think, Monica, roughly, would have dyslexia? We don't have those figures, I don't know.
In Newcastle?
Yeah.
Quite a few hundred.
Yeah. And that's quite a significant number that we're of fish, potential fish, that we're saying we climb the tree now, and that's huge. So, so if you feel irritated, or next one, sorry, Craig, or no, I've got this all wrong, tired, frustrated, annoyed, and interrupted, then imagine how the students feel. That's how they feel a lot of the time. It's like this pressure of trying to get things and pull it all together, and they feel that, it's hard to get that, although you're told things repeatedly, they still can't get it. And so you need to actually, sometimes, for me, I have to sit down and talk to them, and it takes a process of 1 or 2 meetings to see how they do things, and maybe get them to, even mind maps don't always work, for example. Well, that's sort of over-prescribed, I think, sometimes. It doesn't work for everyone. Some people are more visual. Just have to get them to look at things a bit differently and find what works for them. Okay, I think that's, so that's how a lot of people would feel with it. I think I haven't really provided any answers, but I'm just talking from my perspective. And what I do is working individually, and I do find that the students, when I tell students that I also have dyslexia and I was assessed as an adult, that really does go a long way to gain trust. And students feel very comfortable, and they don't feel that any question is stupid, and I think that's a large part of it, is feeling stupid even though you're very intelligent. And I think for having that really works with the students that I work with. And then talking it through and not having a standardised way of supporting, but just talking to them, looking at the work that they're doing, looking at what they have to do, and going through that with them really does help. And those students are doing very well for the most part. Okay, I think that's it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Any, is it questions now, or any questions? Or? Yep, any questions or thoughts? No, so that was the fish reference. Did you get that? Yeah.
Thanks very much, Kendall.